hope you can see the picture now. It says West of England Bandsman's Festival Bugle Contest. Right, most folk will say that playing in a brass band has had a major impact on their life. I certainly can. And although I no longer play, I am still actively involved as a supporter, researcher, and historian. And if you were to ask my wife, she'll say that I have my anorak. Now, there's a few brass band folk I see on today, so I've really got to be careful to get my facts straight. The West of England Bandsman's Festival started in 1912, a hugely important year for brass banding. This modern view of the contest ground is not my photo, but I hope that the photographer won't mind me using it. I might add that I'm almost certainly in the crowd there somewhere. So 1912 was an important year, but the brass band story began much earlier. We begin the story with the military bands, and this amusing cartoon is meant to reflect a decision that musicians were to also become combatants, and you can see them doing a bit of mischief with their instruments. I'll start the story in the early 1800s when military regiments were being disbanded after the Napoleonic Wars. This left players with no musical involvement, and many civilian bands sprang up to fill the vacuum. Many bands of reed and brass players were started, and these were the brass band's true ancestors. Wind instruments have been around since man first learnt to make a noise through a hollow piece of wood. Just like the piece of wood, early brass instruments were limited in their use, and the natural trumpet in the top left photo, is little more than a piece of metal tube. The invention of the valve in the early 1800s was a milestone, and on the right there's some valves. It enabled players to divert the air around longer pieces of tubing, which lowered the note. Players could then produce a chromatic scale, and by doing so, play a tune. It turned the natural trumpet into a modern trumpet or cornet. These reed and brass bands provided an opportunity for the ordinary man in the street to make music. They had a wide appeal, and a huge number of villages in Cornwall had their own. They were hired for most local events, and the players became minor celebrities. Some were formed for specific events like religious festivals and Queen Victoria's coronation in 1837. Adolphe Sax was a Belgian instrument maker, and in 1840 he invented the saxophone. He went on to invent a range of sax horns and sax tubas. His work was very important to the movement, so the next time you're asked to name a famous person from Belgium, you'll be able to. In the middle of the 19th century, reed and brass bands evolved to become just brass, and the golden age of brass bands began. Despite this, some woodwind players hung around for a while, and although referred to as brass bands, some included clarinets and flutes. Because of this, it's impossible to say which was the first pure brass band in Cornwall. Because of the constant threat from overseas, volunteer military units were formed across the country, and these rifle and artillery corps either developed their own band or persuaded civilian bands to join them en bloc. In other words, to take the Queen's shilling. Some became volunteer bands while others resisted, and this 1804 photo of Pendeen Band shows them as an amateur or independent band. If the date is correct, then it's the oldest photo I have. These early bands had no set number of players, nor set number of each instrument, but gradually the composition of the bands evolved and settled on 24 players plus percussion. Moving forward to the 1890s, we have a photo of Verrian Band. It was described as being like Tregony Band, always 3 scats behind. And of course, it's important to involve the youngsters, and the opportunity is there in schools and in the Cornwall Youth Brass Band, which was formed in 1955 and is still active. This is the instrument that I played, but it's not me blowing it. National and local contests have been held from the very early days. And to that, we can now add European and World Championships. Contests are the reason that players spend so many hours trying to perfect their art. It provides them with the opportunity to test their playing against others, and of course, to bring home the silverware. Contests were once held all across Cornwall, and one annual fixture was the Cornwall County Contest, which began in the 1880s, a nomadic event held in many locations. These were major events, some attracting 8,000 people or more. The first contest was held on the 8th of July, 1863, and this record of the results shows that it included a mixture of military and civilian bands. The West of England Bandsman's Festival, affectionately known as Bugle Contest, is said to be the last contest in Britain where bands compete in the open air on a stage with little protection from the elements. To the Cornwall brass band movement, it's a mecca as players and supporters gather for what is a very Cornish event. The first contest was held on the 14th of September 1912. The little clay mining village of Bugle was transformed into a festival location, and 10 bands attended from across Cornwall, plus one from Devon. The Bodmin Guardian described the first contest as a resounding success. It wrote, "There have been other band contests in Cornwall before Saturday, but the important festival which took place at Bugle was, by a long way, the most ambitious and triumphantly successful the delectable duchy has known." The second was in 1913, but the contest was then suspended from 1914 to 1918 because of the First World War. It resumed in 1919, which I found a bit surprising, really, considering that the flu epidemic was still raging. In 1933, there were financial problems and no contest was held, but it resumed the following year. It was then suspended again because of the Second World War, and we can only imagine what it was like when the players returned to the band room to see the empty chairs. The last 2 years have been cancelled because of COVID, but we really do look forward to resumption next year. In all, there have been 95 contests so far. There is huge interest in the announcement of the choice of the contest test pieces, and this is followed by weeks and weeks of rehearsals. Brass bands thrived on competition, and over the years, the standard of play gradually improved as bands practiced hard to win the prizes. Nowadays, we jump in our cars, but back in 1912, they used whatever means they could to get there. Some nearby bands walked or marched to Bugle, while others clambered onto wagons like this. It will be interesting to know how Tiverton got there in 1912 and how long it took them. When I was playing, we always hired a coach, and our stop for the final rehearsal was in the shadow of Roach Rock. Once our musical director was happy, was he ever, we climbed back on board and headed for Bugle. Here, the village was ready, the bands were ready, the roads were closed, the pavements were lined with people, and the march down began. Right, well, I expect you'd rather hear that than me rabbit it on, but anyway, before the various classes can take to the stage, there you see the stage with all the players standing, which they used to up to about 1930s, in the 1930s. But before that stage, the draw has to be made to determine the order of play. The adjudicator is secreted away in a tent. You can see the tent on the left there, so that he or she can't tell which band is playing. Justice has to be done and be seen to be done. So the bands are ready and the players wait to take their turn on stage. The tension is mounting. Some are nervous, others are not, or so they say. They climb the steps, they take their seats, they adjust the height of their music stand, they pin the music in place using the trusty clothes pegs, they check their music. In my case, it was always 3 times. There was an occasion when a certain young man failed to do this. They had to play 2 pieces, a quiet hymn tune and another piece with a loud beginning. It was a case of nice note, wrong piece. The adjudicator has a whistle to signal that he or she is ready for the next band. The whistle blows and we are off. Contesting is a simple process of comparing your performance with others, and where the winners are decided by the adjudicator using a mixture of objectivity and subjectivity. These eminent musicians have the onerous task of deciding who wins and also trying to satisfy the hundreds of amateur adjudicators in the audience. After the last band is played, the adjudicator is released and the decisions are revealed in the time-honored manner, in reverse order. Many Cornish bands have taken part in this contest. Unfortunately, many of them no longer exist. Many upcountry bands too have taken part, including Munham Feltons, Black Dyke, Morris Motors, Mellon Griffiths, and others. This photo shows Kingsbridge Band in 1935 with an impressive backdrop of a clay tip. The first contest venue was held at Peniel House in Bugle, but only the older players will remember playing there. And if you're wondering, yes, I do remember playing there. This photo of St. Denis Silver Band. The stage straddled the hedge, as you can see at bottom center, and the players entered from one field and exited to another. Now, this is not intended as a sexist remark, but it's to show that brass bands were initially a male preserve. But since the late 1940s, the balance of men to women has been gradually changing, and now it's about equal, with the ladies often occupying the key positions. But there were many obstacles before females were accepted. At St. Agnes in 1948, one member said, "'Tis no place for a maid." At Camborne in 1954, it needed a vote before the First Lady could join. And at Newquay in the 1970s, they only let a girl join because they thought she was a boy. In 1967, the contest committee agreed a move from Peniel House to Millinus Park, the home of Bugle Football Club. It was clearly with some regret, as someone wrote, "We missed the beautiful setting of Peniel. It had been a wonderful venue and had become synonymous with the event, but parking and a lack of facilities made it no longer tenable. And from the 50th festival programme, a little nostalgia might be excused in looking back at the pastoral setting of Peniel, Many will remember the gateposts and the tall trees between which one entered the arena, the winding lane to the sloping field where cars were parked in rather carefree manner, and the contest platform built across a Cornish stone hedge between two fields. It has been known for a festival to go on so long at Peniel that cycle lamps had to be used during the presentation of trophies. Make no mistake about it, this is a traditional Cornish event, a truly Cornish festival where old friends meet up and chat over a pasty and a cup of tea. People sit and listen, they stand and listen, and they wander around and chat with folk they may not have seen for 12 months. They listen for the mistakes by opposing bands and hope that the adjudicator has heard them too. Despite its carnival atmosphere, it's a serious musical event where the music produced is of the highest order. Top professionals have conducted here. Top professionals have adjudicated here. Top professionals have composed music for it. No one doubts the importance of this contest, and as one supporter put it, never mind the nationals, who won at Bugle? The refreshment tent too exudes Cornishness. There's a proper Cornish spread awaiting you. 'Tis set out like a tea tree. So our thanks needs to go to all the ladies and gents who feed the inner man. Some bands use their regular musical director, while others bring in a professional conductor for the final few rehearsals and to take them on the day. After one contest, we listened to a recording that someone had made, and amongst the chatter we picked up this comment: he's a good man. He'd bring out the bestest out of the worstest. Derek Greenwood of Camborne always said he'd never win Bugle because he didn't have clay on his boots, so someone presented him with a paper bag of the stuff. It must have worked, as he's the only conductor to win the Royal Trophy with 3 different bands. In most of the classes, all the bands play the same piece. Some are written especially for this contest. Some are about Cornwall. Some are written by composers from upcountry. Some are written by Cornish composers, including a new generation of composers who've had their music played there. So, what if it rains? Well, the short answer is you get wet. This is Camborne in 1936, complete with overcoats. One young lady cornet player recalled that the rain and wind was so bad that everyone was soaked and the music had to be thrown away. She said there were so many clothes pegs on my stand that you could hardly see the music. We had to hold on the music stands with our feet, otherwise they would have blown over. Our conductor couldn't do that, so our drummer had to sit in the middle holding on to his stand, and we were trying to make music. To try and overcome this, the event moved from September to August and then to June. As we all know, it never rains in June. 1971 was the year of the marquee. Heavy rain and gales were forecast and a marquee was erected. For the first and only time, the contest was held under cover. As it happened, it remained dry. The adjudicator, Roy Newsom, said afterwards, despite the event being undercover, I heard everything, whether I was supposed to or not. The following year, it reverted to being held outdoors, but a canopy was erected over the bandstand. This helped greatly with any rain which just happened to be vertical. Once again, the rain kept away. However, it's been used ever since. In 1994, they introduced this blue and white awning, which has now become iconic. We mustn't forget the sponsors. The Giant Clay Company has been a great supporter, and there are other businesses who contribute generously. Without them, the contest would not be in the position it's in today. The committee too deserve a mention, and this 1928 photo shows that it was a fair old team. Today's committee is smaller, but equally hardworking. The event takes a lot of organising, and their members work hard with no reward other than to give something back to the brass band movement. They do a great job and deserve our thanks and our support for continuing to organise this great event. And if any are listening, that will cost them a free ice cream next year. In the early days, that's just what it may have been. At some contests, it was dead or alive animals. Now it's a monetary prize, plus, of course, the coveted silverware. And at Bugle, there's enough silverware to sink the Titanic, and some very generous prize money too. In 1913, the second year of the event, it was granted royal patronage with the presentation of the royal trophy by the Prince of Wales. And that's the trophy you see there now. Cornish winners of this prestigious trophy are Camborne, Bodmin, Falmouth, Mount Charles, Redruth, St Austell, and St Denis. But Bugle is not just about the top bands. There are sections or classes for senior and youth bands, plus a fairly recent addition of a class for training bands, so necessary to provide the youngsters with contest experience and to keep the movement alive. The contest website provides a complete list of results from 1912 to the present day. This is Indian Queen's Band, who won Class B in 1913, and if you look closely, you'll see that one of the prizes is a set of cutlery. St Denis players first won the Royal Trophy in 1920. They were champions for 3 years in a row. For that achievement, they received the first set of hat-trick medals. This is W.E. Moyle collecting a trophy for Newquay Band. Billy was also a composer, and you heard his Trelawney March earlier on the march down. He wrote a great number of pieces, including the famous Cornish Cavalier, which has been used as a test piece on many occasions. These men, two of the giants of the Cornish scene, did battle on many occasions. Second left is Eddie Williams, who conducted St Denis Silver Band for many years. And on the far right is Fred Roberts of Camborne Town Band. In 1962, they shared the Royal Trophy after a dead heat. John Barryman is one of our favourite sons. John was one of the top players in the world and is still active in the movement. He's the only person to play, conduct, and adjudicate at Bugle. Like John, many Cornish brass players have forged a career in music as composers, conductors, and players in major bands and orchestras. To finish, we have the march back up through the village with the trophies. Once again, this picture shows that it was a bit damp. Monham Feltons, who won in 1954. St Denis Band in 1963, leaving the beautiful setting of Peniel. Bugle Band under Hugh Camps. The event is drawing to a close, but there's still one important part of the day. And just before the roads are reopened, the champion band plays a few pieces in the village square, often in failing light. So now there's just time for a pint and a bite to eat in the Bugle Inn. And so it's continued over the years. The march down to the contest field with expectations high, the thrill of competition, the tension as the results are announced, and the march back up through the village with trophies held aloft. It has changed very little over the years. The crowds still gather to cheer on their favourites, and there are few impartial spectators along the route. Playing in a brass band is more than a hobby, more than something to be picked up or discarded at will. It's a way of life that forges a special bond. The adage, once a bandsman, always a bandsman, is so true. It doesn't mean that someone will always play an instrument, but that the sound of a brass band will inspire and excite. It is evocative, a part of our Cornish heritage, and conjures up memories of all those years as a Cornish bandsman. I'd like to finish with a quote from the late Eddie Williams, musical director of St Denis Silver Band. The assembly, the march down to the field, the dash off to rehearse, the waiting are all part of the scene. But to me, Bugle is where old friendships are renewed, created over the years of competition and relived on the day. Names like A.W. Parker, Charlie Baker, George Cave, Tom Moore, Tom Cheney, Ford Knight, whispered in awe when we were youngsters, still highly respected for their ability and integrity. Perhaps our greatest reward will be to be remembered by future bandsmen and bandswomen with as much affection. May Bugle continue to formulate new and lasting friendships. Thanks for listening.